This cat started acting weird around the new neighbor. Carbon monoxide detector explains why. The morning started like any other in Maple Hollow, with frost coating the windows and the smell of coffee drifting through Nerys Campbell's small kitchen. She had lived in this house for 15 years, ever since she retired from the town library, and had grown accustomed to its sounds. The creak of floorboards, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the soft padding of Solace's paws on hardwood. Her grey tabby cat was as predictable as sunrise, always waiting by his bowl at 7 o'clock sharp, tail swishing with dignified impatience. But that Tuesday morning, Solace wasn't by his bowl. Nerys found him in the corner of the kitchen, standing perfectly still. His fur bristled along his spine, and his golden eyes were fixed on the wall that separated her house from the property next door. The wall was ordinary painted plaster, decorated with a faded calendar from the previous year, and a small shelf holding vintage teacups. Yet Solace stared at it as if it were a living thing. "What's gotten into you, old friend?" Nerys asked, her voice gentle. She had adopted Solace 7 years ago from the local shelter, a mature cat who had already lived through one family. He had been calm from the start, never skittish or prone to dramatics. That was precisely why his behavior now unsettled her. She reached out to stroke his back, but he didn't acknowledge her touch. His ears swiveled forward, then back, as if tracking something she couldn't hear. When she called his name more firmly, he finally turned his head, but his pupils were dilated, his body tense. He walked past her without his usual affectionate brush against her legs and disappeared into the living room. Nerys shrugged it off as she poured her coffee. Cats were mysterious creatures, prone to inexplicable moods. Perhaps he had heard a mouse in the walls, or maybe the cold weather was affecting him. She made a mental note to check if he needed an extra blanket in his bed. The house next door had been empty for 3 months. The previous owners, the Hendersons, had moved to Florida to be closer to their grandchildren, leaving behind a well-maintained colonial with blue shutters and a garden that once burst with roses each summer. Nerys had enjoyed their company, particularly Agnes Henderson, who baked lemon bars and shared them over morning tea. The silence next door had been strange, but peaceful, allowing Nerys to settle deeper into her own quiet rhythms. That peace ended a week ago when a moving truck arrived. Nerys had watched from her bedroom window as furniture was carried inside. Simple pieces, nothing fancy, all in dark wood and neutral fabrics. She caught only brief glimpses of the new owner, a man who moved with deliberate slowness, as if each step required thought. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a face that seemed carved from winter itself, all sharp angles and shadows. When they finally met 3 days later at their shared mailboxes, he introduced himself simply as Cale Brennan. His handshake was firm but brief, his grey eyes meeting hers for only a moment before sliding away. He offered no details about where he had come from or why he had chosen Maple Hollow. Nerys, respecting the boundaries of small-town politeness, didn't press. Some people came to places like this to escape something, and questions could feel like intrusions. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she had said warmly. "If you need anything, I'm just next door." "Thank you," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. Then he nodded once and retreated into his house, closing the door firmly behind him. Since that exchange, Nerys had barely seen him. His curtains remained drawn even during the brightest afternoon hours. She noticed his car left early in the morning and returned late at night. No lights appeared in his windows, except for a faint glow in what she assumed was the kitchen. It was the life of someone who wanted to be invisible, and Nerys understood that impulse. She had felt it herself after her husband Walter passed away 12 years ago, but Solace didn't understand. Or perhaps he understood something she didn't. Over the next few days, the cat's behavior grew stranger. He began spending hours sitting in that same spot by the kitchen wall, his tail curled tightly around his body. Sometimes, Nerys would find him there in the middle of the night, a grey statue in the darkness. When she tried to coax him away with treats or toys, he would follow her reluctantly for a few steps, then return to his post. His eating habits changed too. Solace, who had always finished his meals with enthusiasm, now picked at his food, leaving half the bowl untouched. His sleek coat lost some of its shine, and he began to look thinner, his ribs more prominent when Nerys ran her hands along his sides. She scheduled a vet appointment for the following week, worried about illness. Before we continue this touching story, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. A like on this video and your comments below help us share these heartwarming tales with more people who need them. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for being part of this community." At night, new sounds emerged. Scratching. Not the playful scratching of a cat sharpening his claws, but frantic, repetitive scratching on the hardwood floor near the shared wall. Neris would wake to find Solace pawing at the ground in small, tight circles, his breathing rapid. When she turned on the light, he would stop and look at her with what seemed like frustration, as if she were interrupting important work. "You're worrying me," she told him one evening, gathering him into her lap as she sat in her favorite armchair. The chair had belonged to Walter, a worn leather recliner that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. Solace usually loved curling up there with her, purring while she read mystery novels or worked on crossword puzzles. But tonight he squirmed in her arms, his eyes darting toward the kitchen. The house felt different lately, though Neris couldn't quite articulate how. The air seemed heavier, thicker somehow, as if autumn had brought not just cooler temperatures, but a density that pressed against her skin. She found herself opening windows more often, even when the November chill made it uncomfortable, desperate for fresh air that never quite seemed fresh enough. She also noticed she was more tired. Small tasks that once felt effortless now left her winded. Climbing the stairs to her bedroom required a pause halfway up. Her morning walks, once brisk circuits through the neighborhood, had shortened to slow strolls around the block. She attributed it to age, to the inevitable slowing that came with turning 72. But sometimes, in quiet moments, she wondered if something else was wrong. The headaches started around the same time Cale moved in. They were dull at first, easily dismissed as tension or too much time reading small print, but they grew more persistent, settling behind her eyes like a constant pressure. Aspirin helped, but only temporarily. By evening, the ache would return, accompanied by a fog that made thinking feel like wading through mud. One afternoon, Neris stood at her kitchen sink washing dishes and realized she couldn't remember what she had eaten for breakfast. The gap in her memory startled her. She prided herself on her sharp mind, on the mental catalogue she maintained of recipes and garden schedules, and the birthdays of every child she had read to during her library years. This blankness felt wrong. Solace appeared at her feet, meowing urgently. When she looked down, he darted toward the wall, then back to her, then to the wall again. His message seemed clear. Pay attention. But attention to what? She saw nothing unusual. The wall was just a wall. "I don't understand what you want," she said softly, and for the first time in years tears pricked her eyes. She felt foolish, getting emotional over a cat's strange behavior, but the truth was that Solace was more than a pet. He was her companion in this empty house, the living presence that kept loneliness from becoming unbearable. If something was wrong with him, if he was sick or disturbed, she needed to fix it. She needed him to be okay. That night, as November rain tapped against the windows, Solace did something he had never done before. He slipped out through the cat door she had installed in the mudroom, the one that led to her small fenced backyard. He often went out during the day to sun himself on the porch or chase falling leaves, but he never ventured out at night. Neris didn't notice until she woke at 2 in the morning and found his usual spot at the foot of her bed empty. She pulled on her robe and searched the house, calling his name softly so as not to disturb the neighbors. When she opened the back door, cold rain misted her face. The yard was dark except for the distant glow of a street lamp. She called again, more urgently now, her heart beginning to race. 5 minutes passed. 10. She was about to go back inside for her coat and flashlight when she heard a familiar meow. Solace emerged from the shadows near the fence that divided her property from Cale's, moving slowly. When he reached the porch light, Neris gasped. His white paws and chest were covered in dark smudges. Soot. She scooped him up, carried him inside, and grabbed a damp towel. As she cleaned his fur, her mind raced. Where had he been? What had he gotten into? The smudges looked like ash, as if he had walked through a fireplace. But neither she nor Cale had fireplaces, just baseboard heating and old radiators. Solace seemed exhausted, his usual resistance to being cleaned entirely absent. He sat passively as she wiped his paws, his eyes half closed. But when she finished and set him down, he didn't curl up to sleep. Instead, he walked directly back to the kitchen wall, and that's when Neris noticed the carbon monoxide detector. It hung on the wall near the window, a small white device she had installed years ago at Walter's insistence. He had been cautious about such things, always checking smoke alarms and keeping a fire extinguisher under the sink. After he died, Neris had maintained his safety routines more out of habit than concern. The detector had never made a sound, not in all the years it had been there. She couldn't even remember the last time she had checked its batteries. Solus sat directly beneath it now, his gaze fixed on the device as if it held answers to questions only he could ask. His tail wrapped around his body, and he didn't move when Neris approached. She stood beside him, looking up at the detector, seeing nothing unusual. The green light glowed steadily, indicating everything was fine, but was it? For the first time since Kale had arrived, Neris felt something beyond curiosity about her new neighbor. She felt unease, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck that suggested danger without revealing its source. Solus sensed something. Of that she was now certain. Whether it was real or imagined, whether it came from Kale's house or her own, she didn't know. But ignoring it no longer felt like an option. She looked down at her cat, at his serious, watchful face, and made a decision. Tomorrow she would pay more attention. She would watch, listen, and try to understand what Solus was trying so desperately to tell her. December arrived with the kind of cold that settled deep into bones and refused to leave. Maple Hollow transformed into a winter postcard, the kind tourists would photograph and locals would endure. Snow draped itself across rooftops and gathered in the branches of the old maple trees that gave the town its name. Christmas decorations appeared on every porch, except two, Neris's and Kale's. While their neighbors strung lights and hung wreaths, both houses remained dark, as if they had agreed to opt out of the season's cheerfulness. Neris told herself she simply hadn't found the energy this year. The large plastic bins of decorations sat in her basement, untouched. She remembered Walter hoisting them up the stairs each Thanksgiving weekend, how he would spend an entire Saturday untangling lights while she sorted through ornaments, each one carrying a memory. Their children, now grown and scattered across the country with families of their own, used to help, but those days felt like they belonged to someone else's life. This year, the thought of dragging those bins upstairs exhausted her before she even began. Her limbs felt heavy, as if gravity had increased its pull on her specifically. Simple tasks took longer. She would start folding laundry and find herself sitting on the couch 20 minutes later, the basket still full, with no memory of stopping. Time had become elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that left her disoriented. The headaches persisted, sometimes sharp enough to make her close her eyes and wait for the pain to recede. She took more aspirin than the bottle recommended, justifying it by promising herself she would see a doctor after the holidays. But the holidays felt far away despite the calendar insisting otherwise. Days blurred together, distinguished only by whether it was light or dark outside. Solus remained her constant shadow, following her from room to room with unwavering attention. He no longer sat by the kitchen wall for hours. Instead, he stayed within touching distance of Neris at all times. When she sat, he pressed himself against her legs. When she lay down, he positioned himself on her chest, his weight warm and reassuring. His eyes never left her face, watching with an intensity that might have seemed unsettling if it weren't so clearly protective. "I'm fine," she would tell him, stroking his ears. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine, and some part of her knew it. The knowing lived in the back of her mind, a quiet voice she kept pushing away because acknowledging it meant doing something about it, and doing something required energy she no longer had. It was easier to dismiss, to wait, to tell herself that winter always made her sluggish. Her daughter Emily called from California, her voice bright with plans for skiing trips and school concerts. "Mom, you sound tired. Are you sleeping okay?" "Just the weather," Neris assured her. "You know how I get when it's cold. Maybe you should visit us after Christmas, get some sun." "Maybe," Neris said, though the thought of packing a suitcase and navigating airports felt impossible. She changed the subject to Emily's children, to safe topics that didn't require her to explain feelings she couldn't quite name. After she hung up, she looked around her kitchen and noticed for the first time how rarely she had been cooking. The stove, once in constant use, now stayed cold most days. She ate crackers with cheese or soup from a can, or sometimes nothing at all until evening, when her stomach reminded her with a sharp pang. Even her beloved tea had lost its appeal. The act of boiling water, steeping leaves, and sitting down to enjoy it properly seemed to require more steps than she could manage. Solus, meanwhile, had stopped eating almost entirely. His bowl sat full, while his ribs became more prominent beneath his dull coat. Neris called the veterinary clinic, but they were booked solid until after New Year's. "Is it an emergency?" the receptionist asked. "I don't think so," Neris said, though she wasn't sure. What qualified as an emergency when the decline was gradual, when each day was only slightly worse than the one before? She tried tempting Solace with tuna, with chicken, with the expensive treats she bought at the pet store. He would sniff them politely and walk away. The only thing he did with consistency was return to his vigil beneath the carbon monoxide detector. Every night, after following Neris through her evening routine, he would settle under that white device and stare up at it as if waiting for it to speak. One night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Neris got up and stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. The house was silent except for the old radiator's familiar hiss. She had grown up in houses like this, homes heated by systems that clanked and whispered through long winter nights. The sound was supposed to be comforting, a sign of warmth fighting back the cold, but tonight it seemed ominous, like breathing from something large and hidden. "What do you hear that I don't?" she whispered to Solace. He turned his head toward her, and in the dim light from the street lamp outside, his eyes looked almost human in their expression, not just worried, but desperate. She had seen that look before, on the faces of library patrons who couldn't find the words to explain what they needed, but knew she was their only hope of finding it. She walked to him and knelt down, her knees creaking with the effort. This close, she could smell something odd in the air, something metallic and slightly sweet that she couldn't identify. It reminded her of old pennies or blood, or the way air smelled before a storm. She breathed deeply, trying to place it, but the scent was so faint she wondered if she was imagining it. The carbon monoxide detector stared down at her, its green light steady and unblinking. She reached up and pressed the test button. A piercing beep filled the kitchen, so loud it made both her and Solace jump, but after the test ended, silence returned and the green light resumed its calm glow. Everything was fine, according to the device. Everything was safe, except it wasn't. Neris felt it now, a certainty that had nothing to do with logic or evidence. Something was wrong. The wrongness lived in the air she breathed, in the heaviness of her thoughts, in the way Solace looked at her with those urgent, helpless eyes. She sat down on the cold floor beside her cat and ran her hand along his thin back. "Tell me what to do," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't understand." Solace leaned into her touch, but kept his gaze on the detector, as if the answer was right there, visible to him but invisible to her, as if he was waiting for her to see what he had been showing her all along. Outside, a car door slammed. Neris looked toward the window and saw Cale's house across the narrow strip of yard that separated their properties. A light was on in his kitchen, casting a yellow rectangle onto the snow. She could see his silhouette moving behind the curtains, back and forth, like someone pacing or searching for something. Or maybe just unable to be still. She had seen him only twice since that first meeting, once at the mailbox where he nodded without speaking, and once at the grocery store where she noticed him in the frozen food aisle looking thin and pale, his shopping basket containing nothing but coffee and bread. She had started to approach him to ask if he was settling in okay, but something in his posture stopped her. He stood with his shoulders hunched, his head down as if trying to make himself smaller, as if he wanted to disappear. Now, watching his shadow move behind those curtains, Neris wondered what his life looked like inside that house. Did he eat proper meals? Did he sleep well? Did he wake up with headaches and exhaustion that seemed to have no cause? Was he like her, dismissing symptoms as nothing important, waiting for them to pass on their own? The questions felt intrusive, inappropriate. She barely knew the man. What happened in his house was his business, and yet Solace's strange behavior had started the same week Cale arrived. The timing couldn't be coincidence, could it? She stood up slowly, her head spinning with the effort. Solace immediately rose with her, pressing against her ankles as she steadied herself against the counter. She looked down at him, then at the detector, then at the window facing Cale's house. 3 points forming a triangle she couldn't yet connect. "Not tonight," she told Solace. "I'm too tired to figure this out tonight." She made her way upstairs, each step requiring concentration. Solace followed close behind, his tail brushing her calves. When she finally reached her bedroom, she didn't bother changing into her nightgown. She simply lay down on top of the covers, still wearing her sweater and slacks. Sleep came quickly, but brought no rest, only strange dreams of walls that breathed and air that had weight. and color. In the morning, she woke to find Solace sitting on her pillow, his face inches from hers. He touched her cheek with his paw, gently, the way he used to wake Walter when the alarm failed. The gesture was so deliberately human, it made her chest ache. "I'm listening," she promised him. "I just don't know what I'm hearing yet." But even as she said it, she knew time was running out. Whatever Solace was trying to tell her, whatever danger he sensed, it was growing stronger. The green light on the detector said everything was fine, but green lights could lie. Technology could fail. And sometimes the most important warnings came not from machines, but from creatures who loved you enough to keep watching, even when you couldn't understand their language. Nerys rose from bed with effort and looked out her window. Snow was falling again, soft and silent, covering everything in white. Cale's house looked peaceful in the morning light, its blue shutters pretty against the snow. Nothing about it suggested danger, nothing visible anyway. But Solace knew differently, and sooner or later, Nerys would have to trust him enough to look beyond what her eyes could see. The winter solstice came and went, marking the longest night of the year. Maple Hollow celebrated with its annual Luminaria Walk, where residents lined the streets with paper bags filled with sand and candles, creating a glowing path through the neighborhood. Nerys usually participated, enjoying the quiet beauty of the tradition. This year, she didn't even retrieve her bags from the garage. She watched from her living room window as neighbors walked past, their voices carrying on the cold air, their laughter soft and communal. The Johnsons from across the street waved at her window. She waved back but didn't open the door. The thought of putting on a coat, walking down her driveway, making conversation, all of it felt impossible. Not difficult, impossible. There was a difference. Solace sat beside her on the window seat, his body tense despite the peaceful scene outside. His attention wasn't on the luminarias or the neighbors. He was watching Cale's house, where no lights glowed except that single kitchen window. Nerys followed his gaze and felt a familiar unease settle in her stomach. "He's just private," she said aloud, as much to convince herself as the cat. Some people don't like holidays. It doesn't mean anything. But her own house was just as dark, and she knew what that meant for her. It meant exhaustion. It meant confusion. It meant days passing without her quite remembering how she had spent them. If Cale's darkness meant the same thing, then he was in trouble too. The thought should have prompted action, should have made her pick up the phone or walk next door, or at least mention something to a neighbor. Instead, it just made her more tired. That night, the town's volunteer fire department drove through the streets in an antique fire truck, collecting donations for the winter toy drive. Nerys heard the bells ringing and the children shouting, and felt a pang of something she couldn't name. Loss, maybe, or distance. The feeling that life was happening outside while she sat inside, separated by more than just walls and windows. Solace suddenly jumped down from the window seat and ran to the kitchen. Nerys heard him meowing, a sound more urgent than usual. She forced herself up, her body protesting every movement, and found him at the back door, pawing at it frantically. "You want to go out? Now?" She glanced at the clock. 8:30 in the evening, full darkness outside, temperature well below freezing. "It's too cold, old friend, wait until morning." But Solace wouldn't stop. His meowing grew louder, more insistent. He scratched at the door with both paws, leaving marks in the wood. This wasn't normal behavior. This was desperation. Nerys opened the door and Solace shot out into the night. She called after him, but he disappeared into the shadows. Cold air rushed into the kitchen, and she pulled her cardigan tighter. She should have grabbed her coat, should have gone after him, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. She stood in the doorway, shivering, watching the dark yard, hoping he would come back on his own. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Her teeth began to chatter. Finally, she saw movement near the fence. Solace reappeared, moving slowly, and Nerys noticed with alarm that he was limping. When he reached the porch light, she saw why. His right front paw was bleeding, a small cut that left dark spots on the snow behind him. "Oh, sweetheart, what did you do?" She scooped him up carefully and brought him inside, her heart racing. The warmth of the house made her suddenly aware of how numb her face had become from standing in the cold. She set Solace on the counter and examined his paw. The cut wasn't deep, but it was bleeding steadily. She pressed a clean dish towel against it, while Solace remained unnaturally still, his eyes watching her face. As she cleaned and bandaged his paw, she noticed something else. His fur smelled like smoke again. Not the pleasant smoke of a fireplace, but something sharper, more chemical. like burnt plastic or melted rubber. She sniffed his coat more carefully, trying to place the scent, but it was too faint, and her head was too foggy to think clearly. "Where are you going?" she asked him. "What are you trying to find?" He meowed softly, and the sound was so sad it made her eyes water. She finished wrapping his paw in gauze she found in the bathroom cabinet, securing it with medical tape. He let her do it without struggling, as if he understood she was trying to help. When she set him down, he didn't go to his usual spot under the detector. Instead, he limped to the kitchen wall, the one that bordered Cale's house, and pressed his face against it. He stayed like that for several seconds, absolutely still, as if listening to something on the other side. Then he turned and looked at Nerys with an expression so clear it felt like language. "You need to hear this too." She walked to the wall and placed her hand flat against the plaster. It was slightly warm, which made sense since the radiator was nearby. She leaned closer and pressed her ear against it, listening. At first, she heard nothing. Then, very faintly, a sound reached her. A rhythmic hissing like breathing, or like something mechanical cycling on and off, on and off, on and off. Her old furnace made similar sounds, she told herself. Most houses in Maple Hollow had the same aging heating systems. This was normal, ordinary, nothing to worry about. But Solace paced in front of the wall now, agitated despite his injured paw. He meowed at her, then at the wall, then at her again. His message was urgent, but she couldn't translate it. She didn't speak cat. She didn't understand what he needed her to do. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know how to help you." He made a low, frustrated sound and limped back to the detector. This time, he didn't just sit under it. He stood on his hind legs, reached up with his good paw and batted at the device. Not playfully, deliberately, as if trying to activate it or knock it down, or make it do something it wasn't doing. Nerys watched him, her confusion deepening. The detector's green light glowed steadily. Everything was fine according to that light. Everything was safe. So why did her body feel heavy? Why did her thoughts move like honey? Why did Solace seem convinced that something was desperately, dangerously wrong? She picked up the detector's manual from the junk drawer where she had filed it years ago. The paper was yellowed, the print small. She had to squint to read it, and even then, the words seemed to swim on the page. She learned that carbon monoxide was called the silent killer because it had no smell, no taste, no color. Symptoms included headaches, dizziness, weakness, nausea, confusion, and shortness of breath. Her hands began to shake as she read. She had every single symptom, every one, but the detector said everything was fine. She looked at the device more carefully. It was old, she realized. Very old. She couldn't remember when Walter had installed it. Couldn't remember the last time they had replaced the batteries. 10 years ago? Longer? The plastic casing was yellowed with age. Dust gathered in its vents. Could it still work after all this time? Should she have been checking it more carefully? The manual said detectors should be replaced every 5 to 7 years. This one was at least twice that old. The realization hit her like cold water. The device was supposed to protect her, but it was as broken as she felt. It had been lying to her with that steady green light, telling her she was safe when she wasn't, when neither of them were. She looked at Solace, who was staring at her intently. "You knew," she said. "You've been trying to tell me." He meowed, a sound that held both relief and urgency. "Yes," he seemed to say. "Now do something." But what? The stores were closed for the night. She couldn't buy a new detector until morning. Should she call someone? Who? The fire department? And say what? That her cat had convinced her something was wrong? They would think she was a confused old woman, imagining problems that didn't exist. Except the problems did exist. She felt them in her body, saw them in Solace's declining health, smelled them in the air that seemed to grow thicker every day. Something was poisoning them. Carbon monoxide seeping through the walls from Cale's house, or from her own failing heating system, or from both. It didn't matter where it came from. It mattered that it was there, invisible and deadly, while she sat in her kitchen doing nothing. She forced herself to stand and walked to the front door. She opened it wide, letting freezing air rush through the house. Then she went to the back door and opened that too, creating a cross breeze. Solace watched approvingly as fresh air began to circulate, carrying away whatever had been building up inside. The cold was brutal, but Nerys felt her head begin to clear slightly. She grabbed her warmest coat and gloves, then sat in the living room with every window cracked open. Solace curled up beside her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt him relax. His breathing slowed. His body softened. As if finally, she had heard him. "I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner," she told him, stroking his head gently. "I'm sorry I made you work so hard." He purred, a rusty sound from a cat who hadn't purred in too long. Outside, the luminarias had burned down to nothing, and the streets were empty. Maple Hollow slept peacefully while Neris sat in her freezing house, windows open to winter, understanding too late that sometimes safety looks dangerous and danger looks safe, and knowing the difference requires trusting the ones who love you enough to keep warning you, even when you refuse to listen. Tomorrow she would buy a new detector. Tomorrow she would call someone about Cale, make sure he was okay. Tomorrow she would be responsible and careful and smart. But tonight, she just let herself breathe clean air and hold her cat close, grateful that tomorrow was still possible. Neris woke at dawn, still sitting in her living room chair with Solace curled in her lap. Every window remained open, and the house was bitterly cold. Her breath formed clouds in the air. She was shivering violently, but her head felt clearer than it had in weeks. The fog that had been pressing down on her thoughts had lifted enough that she could think in straight lines again. Solace stirred and looked up at her, his golden eyes alert. His bandaged paw had stopped bleeding, though he still favored it when he jumped down and stretched. Neris stood slowly, her joints protesting from a night spent in an awkward position. She closed all the windows except for one in each room, leaving them cracked open an inch. It wasn't enough to keep the house warm, but it would keep fresh air circulating. The hardware store opened at 8. She would be there when they unlocked the doors. But first, she needed to see Cale. If carbon monoxide was leaking from his house into hers, he could be in even more danger. He was there all the time, breathing that poisoned air, while she at least had been opening windows. She looked at Cale's house through her kitchen window. No lights were on. No car was in the driveway. Maybe he had left early for work, wherever he worked. She realized she knew almost nothing about him. Not his job, not his past, not whether he had family somewhere who might check on him. He was a ghost who happened to pay property taxes next door. The clock on her microwave said 6:15. Too early to knock on someone's door. She would have to wait. In the meantime, she could take care of herself. She made a proper breakfast for the first time in weeks, scrambling eggs and toasting bread. The act of cooking, of standing at the stove and tending to food, felt like waking up from a long sleep. She cut up some chicken and offered it to Solace, who ate eagerly, his appetite returning with the fresh air. As she ate, she thought about the past few weeks with new clarity. How gradual the decline had been. How easy it was to explain away each symptom individually. She was tired because of winter. She was confused because she was getting older. The headaches were from stress. Each excuse seemed reasonable until you put them all together and saw the pattern. Walter would have noticed sooner. He had been attentive to such things, always checking on her, making sure she was feeling well. But Walter was 12 years gone, and she had grown used to relying only on herself. Except she hadn't been relying on herself. She had been ignoring herself, and she had been ignoring Solace, dismissing his behavior as a medical problem instead of communication. Cats couldn't talk, but they could warn. They could show you danger if you were willing to see. She thought about all those nights he had sat under the detector, staring up at it, willing it to work. All those times he had scratched at the wall, trying to tell her the poison was coming from there. The soot on his paws from his nighttime investigations, his refusal to eat, his body shutting down from the same invisible poison that was shutting hers down. He had been trying to save her life. At 8 o'clock exactly, Neris drove to Harper's Hardware, one of the few businesses in Maple Hollow that had survived the arrival of big box stores in the neighboring county. Jim Harper had run the place for 40 years, and his daughter Melissa worked alongside him now. The store smelled like lumber and metal, and the coffee that was always brewing in the back. Neris used to come here with Walter to pick out paint colors or gardening supplies, back when they were always working on some project together. Melissa was behind the counter organizing receipts. She looked up with a smile. "Morning, Mrs. Campbell. Cold enough for you?" "Too cold," Neris agreed. "I need a carbon monoxide detector. A good one." "Sure thing. We've got a few different models." Melissa led her to an aisle near the back. "These here are the basic plug-in types, battery backup, and these are the smart ones that connect to your phone. Little more expensive." Neris picked up one of the mid-range models and read the package. It promised to detect dangerous levels of carbon monoxide and would last 10 years. She grabbed 2 of them. "I'll take these. And do you have someone who installs them?" "You just plug them in and mount them on the wall. Pretty straightforward." Melissa paused. "Everything okay at your place?" "I have an old detector that might not be working properly. I should have replaced it years ago." "Better late than never," Melissa said kindly. "Carbon monoxide is nothing to mess with. Jim's brother nearly died from a faulty water heater a few years back. Only reason he survived was his dog wouldn't stop barking." "Dogs know," Neris said quietly. "Animals know all kinds of things we don't. They can smell it or sense it somehow. Jim says his brother's dog saved his life." At the register, Neris hesitated, then asked, "Do you know Cale Brennan? He moved into the Henderson place." Melissa thought for a moment. "Tall guy. Keeps to himself. That's him. He came in a few weeks ago buying furnace filters. Seemed nice enough, quiet." She rang up the detectives. "Why do you ask?" "Just neighborly curiosity." Neris paid and carried her bag to the car. The morning was bright and cold. The sky that particular shade of blue that only appeared in winter. Driving home, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in weeks. She was taking action. She was fixing the problem. Back at her house, she unpacked the first detector and read the instructions carefully. Then she removed the old one from the kitchen wall. The moment she pulled it free, she saw why it had failed. The battery compartment was corroded, green and white buildup covering the contacts. The batteries inside were so old they had started to leak. This device hadn't been protecting her for years. She installed the new detector, plugging it into the outlet beneath where the old one had hung. It powered on with a reassuring beep, and a green light began to blink. According to the manual, it would blink for the first few minutes while it calibrated, then glow steadily when ready. She watched it anxiously, Solace sitting beside her, both of them waiting. The light continued to blink. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. At 5 minutes, Neris began to worry. Then, at 6 minutes, the blinking stopped. But instead of turning solid green, the light turned red. A piercing alarm filled the kitchen, shrieking at a pitch that made Solace yowl and Neris stumble backward. The digital display on the front flashed a number, 150 ppm. She stared at it, her heart hammering. The manual had said anything over 70 ppm was dangerous. Anything over 150 required immediate evacuation. She was reading 150 right now, in her kitchen, in the house she had lived in for 15 years, the house that was supposed to be safe. She ran to the living room and grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. She called 911, and when the dispatcher answered, the words tumbled out in a rush. "This is Neris Campbell at 47 Maple Lane. My carbon monoxide detector is going off. The reading is 150 ppm. I've been sick for weeks. I think my neighbor might be in danger too." The dispatcher's voice was calm, but urgent. "Ma'am, I need you to evacuate the house immediately. Don't turn off any appliances, don't try to find the source. Just get outside right now. I'm sending the fire department." "My cat. Take your cat, but leave right now. Can you do that?" "Yes." Neris scooped up Solace, ignoring his injured paw, and ran for the front door. She didn't grab her purse or her coat. She just ran, still in her house slippers, out into the December morning. The cold hit her like a slap, but she kept moving, down the porch steps, across the front lawn, out to the sidewalk where the dispatcher had told her to wait. She stood there, shivering, holding Solace close. He was shaking too, from cold or fear or relief. Across the street, Mr. Johnson came out of his house. "Neris, what's wrong?" "Carbon monoxide," she managed to say. "The fire department is coming." He was beside her in seconds, draping his own coat over her shoulders. "Come sit in my house." "No, I need to stay here. My neighbor, Cale Brennan. Someone needs to check on him. I think it's coming from his house." Mr. Johnson looked at the Henderson place, at its dark windows and empty driveway. "He's not home. His car's been gone since yesterday." "Are you sure? I saw him leave yesterday morning, haven't seen him come back." The information should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Where was Cale? Was he sick somewhere? In a hospital? Confused and lost like she had been? The carbon monoxide could have affected him even worse than it had affected her. He had no solace to warn him, no creature paying attention to his decline. Sirens cut through the morning quiet. Within minutes, 2 fire trucks pulled up, followed by an ambulance. Firefighters in heavy gear jumped out and began organizing, some heading toward her house, others toward Cale's. Captain Morrison, whom Neris knew from library board meetings years ago, came straight to her. "Mrs. Campbell, are you hurt?" "I don't think so. Just cold and confused and scared." "We're going to check you out," he signaled to the paramedics. "And we're going to find out what's going on. You did the right thing calling." As paramedics wrapped her in a thermal blanket and checked her vital signs, she watched firefighters enter her house wearing masks and carrying equipment. More went next door, breaking through Cale's locked door when no one answered. She clutched Solace tighter, and he pressed his face against her neck, both of them watching the scene unfold like spectators at a disaster that was somehow their own. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, Captain Morrison returned, his expression grim. "Your house is showing elevated levels of carbon monoxide throughout, but the source isn't there. It's coming from next door. Your neighbor's furnace has been leaking badly. The carbon monoxide was seeping through the shared wall into your kitchen. Is he inside?" "No. But Mrs. Campbell, it's bad in there. If he'd been home, he wouldn't have survived the night. We found levels over 400 ppm in his kitchen." Neris closed her eyes, her relief at Cale's absence mixing with horror at how close they had both come to death. 400 ppm. The number was incomprehensible in its danger. She had been sitting in her kitchen day after day, breathing poison that was seeping through the wall. Solace had known. He had tried to warn her, and she had almost ignored him to death. "The paramedic wants to take you to the hospital," Captain Morrison said gently. "Get you checked out properly. You've been breathing this stuff for weeks, it sounds like." "I can't, my cat. He's hurt and he's scared and he needs me." "Mom, he saved my life." Her voice broke. "He tried so hard to tell me, and I didn't listen. I can't leave him now." Captain Morrison looked at Solace, then at Neris, then sighed. "Okay, but you need to be examined here at least, and you can't go back in your house until we've aired it out completely and checked your heating system. Do you have somewhere you can stay?" Mrs. Johnson appeared beside them. "She can stay with us. We have a guest room." Everything after that became a blur of activity. Paramedics confirmed that Neris's oxygen levels were low but not critical, that her heart was strong, that she would probably be fine with rest and clean air. They recommended she see her doctor within the next few days for a more thorough evaluation. Someone brought a carrier for Solace, who protested loudly but allowed himself to be placed inside. Someone else retrieved Neris's purse and phone from her house. Mr. Johnson carried the cat carrier, and his wife guided Neris across the street, still wrapped in the thermal blanket. The last thing Neris saw before entering the Johnsons' house was firefighters airing out both properties, fans running, doors and windows thrown open to the winter air. Her home of 15 years invaded by poison. Cale's home, wherever he was, a death trap waiting for his return. And through it all, the question that would haunt her: why hadn't she trusted Solace sooner? How many warnings had she dismissed before finally, desperately, her body failing and her mind fogging, she had listened? She didn't have an answer. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would spend the rest of her life making it up to the grey tabby cat who had refused to give up on her, even when she had given up on herself. Neris spent that first day at the Johnsons' house in a daze, sleeping more deeply than she had in months. The Johnsons had set up their guest room on the first floor, a cozy space with floral wallpaper and a quilted bedspread that smelled of lavender. They had even brought down a litter box and food bowls for Solace, placing them in the attached bathroom so he would have everything he needed. Solace barely left her side. He curled up on the pillow beside her head, and every time she woke, she found him watching her with those serious golden eyes. His bandaged paw was healing well, and in the clean air of the Johnsons' home, his appetite returned fully. He ate every bite of food Mrs. Johnson offered, and his coat began to regain some of its former shine. "He's a remarkable animal," Mrs. Johnson said, sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of tea for Neris. "Tom told me how he was acting before all this, trying to warn you. I've never heard of such a thing." "Animals know," Neris said, echoing what Melissa at the hardware store had told her. "They can sense what we can't." "Well, he certainly sensed this. You're both lucky to be alive." Lucky. The word felt strange. Neris didn't feel lucky. She felt foolish for not recognizing the danger sooner, guilty for dismissing Solace's warnings, and worried about Cale Brennan, whose whereabouts were still unknown. Captain Morrison had said they were trying to contact him, but so far no one had been able to reach him. By evening, Neris felt strong enough to sit in the Johnsons' living room. Tom brought her a bowl of his wife's chicken soup, and they turned on the news together. The local station was covering the incident. A potential tragedy was averted on Maple Lane today when a Maple Hollow woman discovered dangerous levels of carbon monoxide in her home. Neris Campbell, 72, credits her cat with alerting her to the danger. Firefighters found that a faulty furnace in the neighboring property had been leaking the deadly gas for weeks, possibly months. The screen showed footage of her house and Cale's, firefighters still working, yellow caution tape blocking off both properties. The reporter continued, "The owner of the property where the leak originated, Cale Brennan, could not be reached for comment. Authorities say his whereabouts are currently unknown, raising concerns about his well-being. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause confusion and disorientation, and officials worry he may be in need of medical attention." Neris's hands tightened around her soup bowl. Cale was out there somewhere, possibly dying, while they sat in warm houses eating dinner. The thought was unbearable. "They'll find him," Tom said, seeing her distress. "The police are looking. They'll check hospitals, talk to his employer if he has one. He'll turn up. But what condition would he be in when they found him? How long had he been breathing that poison? His house had levels over 400 ppm. What did that do to a person's mind, their body? Neris remembered the way he had looked in the grocery store, thin and pale and hunched, as if carrying weight no one else could see. That weight had been invisible poison, slowly killing him. That night, lying in the unfamiliar guest room with Solace purring beside her, Neris prayed for a man she barely knew. She prayed he was somewhere safe, that someone had found him, that he would have the chance to recover, the way she was recovering now with each breath of clean air. The next morning brought news. Captain Morrison called while Neris was having breakfast. "We found Cale Brennan. He's alive." Neris sagged with relief. "Where was he?" "He drove to Boston 2 days ago. He'd been feeling sick for weeks, and finally decided to see a doctor. The doctor admitted him to the hospital. He's been there since Monday getting treatment. They thought he had the flu or maybe pneumonia. When we contacted them this morning and explained about the carbon monoxide, everything made sense." "Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors think so. He was in bad shape when he arrived, but they've been giving him oxygen therapy. He got lucky getting out of that house when he did. Another few days and—" Captain Morrison trailed off, leaving the dark possibility unspoken. "He wants to talk to you. I gave him your number. I hope that's okay." "Of course." The call came that afternoon. Neris heard Cale's voice for the first time since that brief greeting at the mailbox weeks ago. It was rougher now, strained, but the relief in it was palpable. "Mrs. Campbell, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe. The fire chief told me about your cat, how he kept trying to warn you. If you hadn't figured it out—" His voice broke slightly. "I didn't know. I thought I was just getting old. Thought winter was getting to me. I kept meaning to have someone look at the furnace, but I kept putting it off. I was so tired all the time. Couldn't think straight." Neris understood completely. "I know. I felt the same way. It's hard to make good decisions when the thing making you sick is also affecting your judgment. I almost died in that house. We both almost died." He was quiet for a moment. "The doctors say I'll need a few more days here, maybe a week. Then I need somewhere to stay while they fix the furnace and air out the house. I don't suppose you know any places? Hotels are expensive for long-term." "The Maple Hollow Inn does weekly rates," Neris suggested. "It's small but clean. Or there's Mrs. Patterson on Oak Street who rents rooms." "Thank you. And Mrs. Campbell, when I get back I'd like to meet your cat properly, to thank him myself." After they hung up, Neris sat quietly, thinking about the strange chain of events that had brought them here. If Cale hadn't moved in next door, his furnace wouldn't have been poisoning her house. But if she hadn't been affected, she wouldn't have noticed anything wrong. He might have come home from the hospital to an even worse situation, the leak still going, no one aware of the danger. In a terrible way, they had saved each other by being close enough for the poison to cross from his house to hers, where Solace could detect it. The next few days passed in a comfortable routine at the Johnsons' house. Neris regained her strength quickly with rest and clean air. Her headaches disappeared, her thoughts cleared. She felt like herself again, the person she had been before November's fog descended. Solace thrived too, his injured paw healing completely, his energy returning. He played with a catnip mouse Mrs. Johnson bought him, pouncing and rolling with kittenish joy that Neris hadn't seen from him in years. On the fourth day, Captain Morrison called with better news. "Your house is safe now. We've aired it out completely, checked your heating system, installed new detectors in multiple rooms. You can go home whenever you're ready." Home. The word carried complicated feelings. Relief, certainly, but also wariness. That house had almost killed her. Would she ever feel completely safe there again? What about Cale's house? They're replacing the entire furnace. It's going to take at least 2 weeks, maybe longer with the holidays coming up. He knows he can't go back until it's done. That evening, Neris packed her few belongings and prepared to return to 47 Maple Lane. The Johnsons hugged her goodbye, made her promise to call if she needed anything, and Tom carried Solace's carrier across the street for her. When they opened the front door, fresh air greeted them. Every room smelled clean, almost sterile, nothing like the heavy atmosphere she had grown used to without realizing it. Tom helped her do a final check of all the new carbon monoxide detectors, 6 of them now placed throughout the house. Each one showed green, steady lights, normal levels, safe levels. He showed her the new detector in her bedroom, one in the basement near the furnace, one in the upstairs hallway. "The fire department doesn't mess around," he said. "You're probably safer now than you've ever been." After he left, Neris released Solace from his carrier. He walked through the house slowly, sniffing everything, testing the air with senses more reliable than any machine. When he reached the kitchen, he paused at the wall where he had spent so many vigilant hours. He sniffed it carefully, then turned and walked away without a backward glance. His work was done. That night, Neris cooked a real dinner for the first time in weeks. Pasta with vegetables, garlic bread, a simple salad. She ate at her kitchen table, Solace sitting in the chair across from her where Walter used to sit, and felt grateful for small things. The taste of food, the warmth of the house, the company of a creature who loved her enough to fight for her survival. Before bed, she stood at her kitchen window and looked at Cale's house. It was completely dark now, empty, waiting for repairs. She wondered what would happen when he returned. Would he be the same distant, silent neighbor? Or would this shared experience create a connection between them? 2 people who had survived something invisible and deadly, saved by the persistence of an animal and the clarity that came just in time. She didn't have answers. But standing there looking out at the winter night with Solace rubbing against her ankles, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not just for herself, but for the possibility of community, of looking out for each other, of paying attention when something felt wrong even if you couldn't explain why. Tomorrow she would call Emily in California and tell her everything. Tomorrow she would make an appointment with her doctor for a proper checkup. Tomorrow she would start thinking about the future, instead of just surviving the present. But tonight she just stood at her window, breathing clean air, and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for second chances. Christmas came quietly to Maple Hollow. Neris still didn't decorate, but this time it was a conscious choice rather than exhaustion-driven neglect. She spent the holiday on the phone with Emily and her son David, catching them up on everything that had happened. Both wanted her to come visit, to get away from the house that had almost killed her, but she declined gently. She needed to be here, to reclaim this space, to prove to herself that she could feel safe in her own home again. On Christmas Eve, a delivery arrived. Neris opened the door to find the enormous gift basket on her porch, wrapped in cellophane with a red bow. The card read, "To Solace, the hero of Maple Lane, and to Mrs. Campbell for listening when it mattered. Grateful beyond words. Cale." Inside the basket were gourmet cat treats, toys, a plush bed embroidered with Solace's name, and a beautiful leather-bound journal. Tucked inside the journal was a note in careful handwriting. "Mrs. Campbell, the doctors say I can leave the hospital tomorrow. I'll be staying at the Maple Hollow Inn while they work on my house. I'd like to visit if you're comfortable with that. I owe your cat my life, and I owe you an apology for bringing danger next door. Please let me know when would be a good time. Cale Brennan." Neris called the number he'd provided. He answered on the second ring, his voice stronger than it had been during their previous call. "Thank you for the basket," she said. "It was very thoughtful, but you don't owe me an apology. You didn't know about the furnace, neither of us did. Still, I should have been more careful. I should have had it inspected when I moved in. He paused. "I wasn't thinking clearly. About anything. I came to Maple Hollow to start over, to find some peace, and instead I nearly killed us both. Well, we're both still here. That's what matters." Neris hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to visit whenever you'd like. Solace and I are home most days." He came the next afternoon, Christmas Day, carrying a small gift bag. Neris had been preparing tea when she heard the doorbell, and she felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. This was the first time they would really talk, the first time she would see him as more than a shadow next door. When she opened the door, she was struck by how different he looked. The gauntness was still there, but his color was better. His grey eyes, which had seemed so dull and distant before, were clearer now. He wore a thick wool sweater and a scarf, and he held himself more upright, as if some weight had been lifted. "Come in," she said warmly. "I just made tea." Solace appeared immediately, sitting in the entryway and studying Cale with that intense feline focus. Cale knelt down slowly, extending his hand for Solace to sniff. The cat approached cautiously, investigated the offered hand, then rubbed his head against it. Cale's face transformed with a smile, the first real smile Neris had seen from him. "You're the reason I'm alive," he told Solace softly. "Thank you." Solace meowed once, a sound that seemed to carry acceptance, then turned and walked toward the kitchen, tail high. The humans followed. Over tea and the Christmas cookies Mrs. Johnson had brought over, Cale's story emerged in pieces. He had been an architect in Boston, successful and busy, married to his college sweetheart. 3 years ago, his wife died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition. She was only 57. The loss shattered him. "I couldn't stay in our house," he said, staring into his teacup. "Couldn't work on buildings anymore. Everything reminded me of her. So I sold everything, took early retirement, and decided to find somewhere quiet, somewhere I could disappear." "Maple Hollow is good for disappearing," Neris said gently. "I tried it myself after my husband died." He looked up, surprised. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. 12 years ago. Walter. He was a good man. For a long time after, I just went through the motions. The library helped, having work to focus on. And eventually, the grief became something I could live with, instead of something that lived inside me, consuming everything. Does it ever stop hurting? It changes shape, becomes less sharp. You learn to remember the love more than the loss." She refilled their teacups. "But isolation doesn't help. I know because I tried that too." Cale nodded slowly. "The doctors in Boston told me I'd been suffering from depression. Not just the carbon monoxide, though, that made everything worse. They said I needed to talk to someone, maybe join a grief group. I've been resistant to that idea." "Why?" "Because talking about it makes it real. Talking about her being gone means accepting she's gone, and I'm not ready for that." Neris understood. She remembered those first years after Walter, how people would ask how she was doing, and she would change the subject, unable to put the enormity of her loss into words. But she also remembered the day she finally joined a widow's support group at the library. How terrifying it had been to sit in that circle of folding chairs and say out loud, "My husband died, and I don't know how to live without him." And how, after saying it, the weight had shifted just slightly, become fractionally more bearable. "You don't have to be ready," she told Cale. "You just have to take the next small step. That's all any of us can do." They sat quietly for a moment, and Solace jumped onto the table, sitting between them as if mediating their conversation. Cale reached out and stroked the cat's head, and Solace closed his eyes, purring. "He really is remarkable," Cale said. "The fire chief told me he was trying to warn you for weeks, sitting by the detector, scratching at the wall, even sneaking outside to investigate. How did you finally figure it out?" Neris told him about that night, about opening all the windows and sitting in the freezing cold, about going to the hardware store the next morning and installing the new detector. "But I should have known sooner. He was trying so hard to tell me. I just wasn't listening. You were being poisoned. Your judgment was impaired. You can't blame yourself for that, I suppose. But I'll never dismiss his behavior again. If he acts strange, I'll pay attention immediately." She smiled at Solace, who blinked slowly at her, a cat kiss. "He earned my complete trust." Cale reached into the gift bag he'd brought. "I got him something. I hope it's okay." He pulled out a small collar, deep green velvet with a brass tag that read, "Solace, Hero of Maple Lane." Neris felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect." They replaced Solace's old collar with the new one, and the cat seemed to sit straighter as if he knew he was being honored. Cale laughed, a rusty sound, like something that hadn't been used in a long time but still worked when needed. Before he left, Cale hesitated at the door. "Would it be all right if I visited again? I don't have anyone here yet. No friends." And you're the only person who really understands what we went through. I'd like that, Neris said honestly. I don't have many visitors these days either. After he left, she stood at her window watching him walk to his car. He moved differently now, with purpose instead of defeat. The near-death experience had shaken something loose in both of them, she realized. The fog that had surrounded her for weeks wasn't just from carbon monoxide. It was the fog of existing without fully living, of going through motions without purpose or connection. Solace rubbed against her legs and she picked him up, holding him close. You didn't just save our lives, she told him. You reminded us we have lives worth saving. That night, for the first time since November, Neris pulled out her recipe box. She flipped through cards in her mother's handwriting, in Walter's handwriting, in her own younger script. Each card held memories of dinners shared, holidays celebrated, ordinary Tuesdays made special by good food and conversation. She selected a recipe for beef stew, Walter's favorite, and made a grocery list. Tomorrow she would cook. She would make enough for leftovers, enough to share with Cale when he visited again. She would fill her house with good smells and warmth, reclaim it as a space for living instead of just surviving. As she prepared for bed, she noticed something remarkable. Every carbon monoxide detector in the house glowed green, steady and reassuring. The numbers on their displays read 0 ppm, 0. Clean air, safe air, air you could breathe without it slowly killing you. It seemed like such a small thing, such a basic requirement for life. But after coming so close to losing it, Neris knew she would never take it for granted again. She would check those detectors regularly, replace batteries, stay vigilant, and she would trust Solace always if he ever acted strange again. In the bedroom, Solace had already claimed his spot on Walter's pillow, the one Neris had kept all these years, but never slept on herself. He looked at her with those wise golden eyes, and she could have sworn he smiled. "Thank you," she whispered one more time. "Thank you for not giving up on me." He purred loud and steady, a sound like an engine running, like life continuing, like hope humming in the darkness. And Neris fell asleep, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. January arrived with the kind of cold that made everything brittle. Tree branches snapped under ice. Car engines refused to start. People hurried from building to building, hunched against wind that seemed to cut through every layer of clothing. But inside Neris's house on Maple Lane, warmth was returning in ways that had nothing to do with the functioning furnace. Cale began visiting regularly. At first, the visits were brief, formal. He would stop by with coffee from the bakery downtown or a newspaper to share. They would sit in the living room, Solace positioned between them like a bridge, and talk about safe topics. The weather, town news, books they had read. Neris learned he liked historical fiction and biographies. He learned she preferred mysteries and had once tried to write one herself. "Did you finish it?" he asked one afternoon, as snow fell steadily outside. "Got about 50 pages in before I realized I had no idea how to plot a murder." She smiled at the memory. "Walter kept finding my notes around the house, lists of poisons, ways to hide bodies. He joked that he should be worried. Maybe you should try again. You've certainly lived through enough drama lately for inspiration." The comment surprised her. It was the first time Cale had referenced their near-death experience with something approaching lightness. She studied him and saw that his face had filled out slightly. He was eating better, sleeping better. The doctors had been right. Getting away from that poison-filled house had saved him. "How are you doing?" she asked directly. "Really doing?" He considered the question with the careful thought she was learning was characteristic of him. "Better. Worse. Both." He paused. "The grief counselor I've been seeing says I'm in the anger stage now. Angry that someone as good as Maria died while I'm still here. Angry that I didn't notice how sick I was getting. Angry at myself for letting the furnace go uninspected." He shook his head. "It's exhausting being angry all the time. But necessary," Neris said. "You have to go through it, not around it. That's what the counselor says too." He managed a weak smile. "At least I'm talking to someone now. That's progress." It was. Neris could see the difference in him from week to week. The defeated slump of his shoulders was straightening. His eyes, while still sad, had regained focus. He was engaging with the world again instead of hiding from it. Meanwhile, work continued on his house. Neris watched from her window as contractors came and went, hauling out the old furnace and installing a new system. They replaced sections of wall, repainted, aired everything out. Captain Morrison stopped by one evening to check on her, and reported that they were testing the air quality in Cale's house daily. Should be safe for him to return by end of February, the captain said. Maybe sooner if everything checks out. The news should have been good, but Neris felt an unexpected pang at the thought of Cale moving back next door, returning to his solitary life. She had grown used to his visits, looked forward to them even. The house felt less empty when he was there, less like a place where she was waiting for something to happen, and more like a place where life was actually occurring. "You're going to miss him," Mrs. Johnson observed when Neris mentioned it during their weekly tea. "When he moves back." "I suppose I will." Neris stirred honey into her cup. "Is that strange? We barely know each other. Shared trauma creates bonds. You both went through something terrible and came out the other side. That connects you." Mrs. Johnson leaned forward. "But you know what connects you more than that? You're both lonely. You're both grieving. You're both trying to figure out how to live in the after." The words hit Neris with unexpected force, because they were true. She and Cale were mirrors of each other, separated by different losses and different timelines, but fundamentally walking the same path. He was still in the acute phase of grief, raw and stumbling. She was further along, the edges worn smooth by time, but still navigating a life that sometimes felt like a poor translation of the one she was supposed to be living. That evening she called Cale at the inn. "Would you like to come for dinner tomorrow? I'm making beef stew." There was a pause, then his voice quieter. "I'd like that very much." He arrived at 6, holding a bottle of red wine. "I wasn't sure if you drank, but I thought I'd bring it just in case. Walter and I used to have wine with dinner every Friday. I haven't in years, but maybe it's time to start again." She took the bottle and led him to the kitchen, where the stew was simmering and fresh bread was cooling on the counter. The smell filled the house, rich and comforting. They ate at the small kitchen table, Solace supervising from his perch on the windowsill. The wine was good, the food even better, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had before. Cale told her about his work as an architect, the buildings he had designed, the satisfaction of seeing something he'd imagined take solid form in the world. Neris told him about her years at the library, the children she'd read to, the adults she'd helped find exactly the right book to carry them through whatever they were facing. "I miss it sometimes," she admitted. "The purpose of it. Feeling useful." "You were useful," Cale said firmly. "Libraries are sacred spaces. Librarians are the keepers of knowledge and stories. That's not small work." "Thank you, I needed to hear that." She refilled their wine glasses. "What about you? Do you miss architecture?" "The work, yes. The politics and deadlines, no." He swirled his wine. "Maria always said I should have been an artist instead, that I cared more about beauty than function, more about emotion than efficiency." She was probably right. Was she an artist? She taught art history at Boston College. Knew everything about painting and sculpture, could spend hours in museums just looking, really looking. His voice caught slightly. She would have loved Maple Hollow. Small towns, old architecture, that sense of history in every building. "I think that's partly why I chose here. I knew she would have liked it." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, and then Neris asked the question that had been on her mind. "Do you think you'll stay? After your house is fixed?" "I don't know. Some days I think I should go back to Boston, face things properly instead of hiding in a small town. Other days I think maybe hiding is what I need right now. What about you? Your kids must want you closer." "They do. Emily calls every week suggesting I move to California. David wants me in Seattle, but this is my home. Walter and I built our life here. I can't just abandon that, even after it almost killed you." The bluntness of the question surprised her. "Even then." "Because it didn't kill me. I survived." Solace made sure of that. She reached out to stroke the cat, who had jumped down from the windowsill to investigate whether there might be stew available for felines. "And I think I needed to go through that to remember I'm alive. Does that make sense?" "Complete sense." Cale met her eyes. "I felt the same way in the hospital. Lying there with oxygen tubes and IVs, I kept thinking, I almost died. And then, but I didn't. And then, so now what? What do I do with this life I still have? Have you found an answer?" "Not yet, but I think maybe the answer is just this. Having dinner with a friend, talking honestly, letting myself feel everything instead of numbing it, taking it day by day. Friend." The word warmed Neris in a way the wine and food couldn't. She had lost touch with most of her friends over the years. Some had moved away. Some had passed. Others had simply drifted into different orbits, the natural attrition of aging. She hadn't realized how much she missed friendship until Kale named it. After dinner, they sat in the living room, while Solace entertained them by attacking a toy mouse with fierce determination. Kale laughed at the cat's antics, and Nerys found herself laughing too, real laughter that came from somewhere deep and felt like medicine. When Kale finally left, close to 10 o'clock, he paused at the door. "Thank you. For dinner, for the conversation, for everything. I didn't realize how much I needed normal until tonight." "You're welcome any time," Nerys said, and meant it completely. That night, lying in bed with Solace purring beside her, Nerys thought about the strange path that had led them here, a near tragedy that had become somehow the beginning of healing, a neighbor who had been a source of danger but had become a friend, a cat who had saved 2 lives and created a bridge between 2 lonely people. The world worked in mysterious ways. Terrible things happened, yes, but sometimes, if you were lucky, those terrible things cracked you open enough to let light back in. And sometimes, the light came in forms you never expected. A dinner invitation, a bottle of wine, a conversation that reminded you that your life still had chapters left to write. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Maple Hollow in fresh white. Inside, the detectors glowed green. The furnace hummed reliably, and Nerys drifted to sleep, feeling for the first time in years that perhaps the best parts of her life weren't all in the past. February brought the kind of warming that was more promise than reality. Days would hit 40 degrees, and people would walk around without hats, convinced spring was imminent. Then night would plunge back to freezing, creating treacherous ice that sent the emergency room into overdrive. Nerys watched from her window as contractors worked on Kale's house, the work slowing during the worst cold snaps and accelerating during the false thaws. Kale continued living at the Maple Hollow Inn, but spent his days next door, overseeing the renovations. His architectural training became apparent as he made decisions about the work. He didn't just want the furnace replaced, he wanted the entire heating system upgraded. He didn't just want the air tested, he wanted ventilation improved throughout the house. What had started as emergency repairs evolved into a comprehensive renovation. "If I'm going to live here, I want it done right," he told Nerys one afternoon as they stood in his kitchen, now stripped down to studs. The smell of fresh lumber filled the space. "Every time I walk in here, I remember how close I came to dying. I need to make this house feel different. Safe." Nerys understood completely. She had done something similar in her own house after Walter died, painting rooms new colors, rearranging furniture, creating a space that could hold her grief without drowning in it. Physical changes couldn't erase trauma, but they could help reframe it. "What are you thinking?" she asked, looking around at the exposed walls. "New cabinets, new countertops, better windows. Maybe knock down this wall between the kitchen and dining room. Open it up." Maria always loved open floor plans. He paused. "Is that morbid? Renovating based on what my dead wife would have liked?" "Not morbid. Memorial. You're creating a space that honors her taste." Nerys touched his arm gently. "That's healthy, Kale." He nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. Over the past weeks, Nerys had learned to read his moods. The grief counseling was helping, but grief didn't follow a schedule or respond to logic. Some days, Kale was present and engaged. Other days, he moved like a ghost through his own life, there physically but absent in every way that mattered. Before we continue this touching story, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. A like on this video and your comments below help us share these heartwarming tales with more people who need them. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for being part of this community. Today was an absent day. She could see it in the way his shoulders curved inward, the way his eyes didn't quite focus on what they were looking at. She had learned not to push on days like this, to simply be present without demanding anything in return. "Coffee," she offered. "My place." "Thank you." They walked across the narrow strip of yard between their houses, Kale carrying paint samples to show her. Inside Nerys's kitchen, Solace greeted them with his usual inspection, rubbing against Kale's legs with approval. The cat had taken to Kale completely, treating him with the same affection he showed Nerys. Sometimes, when Kale visited, Solace would choose his lap over hers, curling up and purring, while Kale absent-mindedly stroked his fur. "He knows," Nerys said, watching the interaction. "Solace knows you needed saving too." "I'm not sure I'm worth saving." The words came out flat, exhausted. Don't say that. Why not? It's how I feel. Cale sank into a chair. Maria was the good one. She taught kids to see beauty in art. She volunteered at homeless shelters. She made the world better. I drew buildings, that's not the same. You created spaces where people live and work. You shaped the environment we all move through. That matters. Does it? Neris poured coffee and sat across from him. Outside, clouds were gathering, promising more snow. When Walter died, I went through a phase where I couldn't see the point of anything. Why cook if he wasn't there to eat it? Why garden if he wasn't there to enjoy it? Every action felt pointless because the person who gave those actions meaning was gone. How did you get past it? Slowly, badly, with a lot of mistakes. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. But eventually I realized that the point wasn't that Walter was gone. The point was that I was still here, and as long as I was here, I had a choice about what to do with the time I had left. I could either honor our life together by living fully, or dishonor it by giving up. That sounds nice in theory. It's hard in practice. Some days I still don't want to get out of bed. Some days I still wonder what the point is. She met his eyes. But then Solace needs feeding, or Mrs. Johnson needs help with a recipe, or you knock on my door. And those small things become the point. Not because they're profound, but because they're real. Cale looked at Solace, who had settled on the windowsill in a patch of weak sunlight. He's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other. She paused. And you're lucky too, Cale, even if you can't feel it yet. You survived. Your body kept working even when that house was trying to kill you. That's worth something. Is it? Some days I'm not sure survival is the same thing as living. It's not, but it's the necessary first step. Neris reached across the table and touched his hand. You're doing the work. The counseling, the renovations, showing up even on the hard days. That's what living looks like when you're rebuilding from scratch. It's not pretty or inspiring. It's just continuing, day after day, until one day you realize you've built something new. They sat in silence, drinking coffee, watching snow begin to fall. After a while, Cale pulled out the paint samples. Help me choose? Of course. They spread the samples across the table, an array of whites and grays and soft blues. Cale had always been drawn to cool colors, Maria to warm ones. They had compromised in their Boston house, alternating rooms between his preferences and hers. Now he was choosing for himself alone, and every decision felt weighted with meaning. Maria would tell me to pick what I love, he said. She always said I was too accommodating, too quick to defer to others. Was she right? Probably. He touched a sample called Misty Morning, a soft gray blue. I like this one. It reminds me of dawn, new beginnings. Then that's the one. Over the next week, color transformed Cale's house. The walls went from builder's white to that soft gray blue, and the change was remarkable. The space felt lighter somehow, more intentional. New windows were installed, flooding rooms with natural light. The kitchen took shape with simple white cabinets and butcher block countertops, clean and functional, but also warm. Neris watched the transformation with interest. She saw Cale's personality emerging in the choices. Minimal decoration, maximum function, everything carefully considered. It was a house designed by someone who had been an architect, but it was also a house designed by someone learning to live again after terrible loss. Near the end of the month, the final inspections were complete. Captain Morrison himself came to give his approval. This place is safer than new, he told Cale. You can move back in any time. That evening, Cale stood in his empty living room, looking around at what he had created. Neris stood beside him, Solace in her arms. The house smelled of paint and new wood. Everything was clean, fresh, waiting. It doesn't feel like home yet, Cale admitted. It will, Neris assured him. Give it time. Fill it with your things, your routines, your life. Home isn't just a space, it's what you do in it. Will you help? When I move my furniture back in? Of course. And I'll bring food so you don't have to cook your first night. Moving day arrived with the first genuine warmth of the year. The sun felt real for the first time since October, and people walked around with their coats unzipped, faces turned toward the light. Tom and a few other neighbors showed up with trucks to help move Cale's furniture out of storage. Neris provided sandwiches and lemonade, and the work became a community effort. By evening, the basics were in place. Cale's furniture, simple and well-made, suited the renovated space perfectly. His books filled built-in shelves. His clothes hung in closets. The house looked lived in, ready. Neris brought over the promised meal, lasagna, salad, and fresh bread. They ate in Cale's new kitchen at his old table, and he raised his glass of water in a toast to new beginnings, and to Solace, who made them possible. To Solace, Nerys agreed, and they both looked at the cat, who was exploring his new territory with great interest, sniffing every corner and testing every surface. After dinner, as Nerys prepared to leave, Cale walked her to the door. "Thank you for everything. The past 2 months, I don't know how I would have gotten through them without you. Same, it's easier when you're not alone. We'll still see each other, even though I'm back next door. Are you kidding? You're not getting rid of us that easily." Nerys smiled. "Besides, I'm going to need someone to talk to when Solace gets into his next adventure." They laughed, and Solace, as if on cue, knocked a pen off Cale's counter, sending it clattering across the floor. Some things apparently never changed. That night, lying in her own bed in her own house, Nerys listened to the normal sounds of her neighborhood, a car passing, wind in the trees, the distant bark of a dog, and next door, in a house that had almost been a tomb but was now a home again, a man who was learning to live after loss. They were neighbors in every sense now, not just in proximity but in shared experience and mutual support. Solace stretched beside her, his new collar glinting in the moonlight. "Hero of Maple Lane," the tag read. He wore it well. March came in like a lamb for once, gentle and mild. The snow melted gradually, revealing grass that was surprisingly green underneath. Crocuses pushed up through half-frozen ground, purple and white declarations of resilience. The maple trees began to bud, and Maple Hollow started to remember what spring felt like after the long, brutal winter. Nerys felt the change in her own body. She had more energy now, her mind sharp and clear. The doctor had done a thorough examination after the carbon monoxide incident and declared her remarkably healthy for 72. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he had said. What she was doing was living again instead of just existing, though she didn't explain that to him. She started gardening as soon as the ground thawed enough to work. Her garden had been Walter's domain originally, but after he died she had maintained it more as obligation than pleasure. Now, kneeling in the damp earth with sun on her back, she felt something rekindling. She planted tulip bulbs and divided perennials, planned vegetables for the summer. Her hands remembered the work even if her mind had forgotten why it mattered. Cale often joined her in the late afternoons. He had created a small garden space behind his house and sought her advice constantly. "I've never grown anything in my life," he admitted, looking skeptically at the seed packets she had given him. "How do you know they're going to work?" "You don't. That's the point. You plant them with hope and tend them with care, and most of the time they grow. Sometimes they don't, and you try again next year." She showed him how to prepare soil, how deep to plant, how much to water. Gardening is good for grief. You put dead-looking things in the ground and trust that life will come from them. He understood the metaphor. Over the following weeks, they gardened together, their hands in the soil, Solace supervising from various sunny spots. The physical work was meditative, requiring attention but not thought, presence but not answers. They talked while they worked, or didn't talk, comfortable either way. Nerys learned more about Maria during these garden sessions, how she had loved Impressionist paintings, how she had made the world's best apple pie, how she had laughed loudly at terrible puns, how she had been trying to convince Cale to adopt a cat when she died. She would have loved Solace, Cale said one afternoon, watching the cat stalk a butterfly. She believed animals made people more human, more empathetic. She sounds wise. She was, is. I don't know what tense to use anymore. He sat back on his heels, wiping dirt from his hands. The counselor says I should practice saying she was, that it helps with acceptance, but every time I say it I feel like I'm erasing her. You're not erasing her by using past tense. She was real. She was important. She was loved. All of that is past tense because it already happened, but it's also permanent. It doesn't disappear just because she did. Cale considered this, then nodded slowly. That helps. Thank you. As spring strengthened, the town came alive. The Maple Hollow Garden Club started their weekly meetings again, and Mrs. Johnson convinced Nerys to join them. "You know more about gardening than all of us combined," she argued, and Nerys found she couldn't refuse. She attended her first meeting in 12 years and was welcomed warmly by women she had known casually for decades. They asked about her health, praised Solace, and invited her to participate in their annual garden tour. "I don't know," Nerys hedged. My garden isn't much to look at." "Nonsense," said Helen Crawford, who had known Neris since they were both young mothers volunteering at the elementary school. "Your roses are legendary. We'd love to include your yard." So Neris found herself preparing for the garden tour, spending extra time deadheading flowers and weeding paths. Cale helped, and before long, they had decided to include his garden too, small as it was. First-year garden, they would call it, an example of beginning again. The tour fell on the first Saturday in May, and perfect weather arrived as if ordered. Neris's garden looked better than it had in years, and visitors wandered through with genuine appreciation. They admired the roses, asked questions about her perennials, and petted Solace, who held court on the porch like the celebrity he had become. When visitors moved to Cale's garden, they saw neat rows of vegetables just beginning to show, and flowers planted with more enthusiasm than expertise. But they also saw something else. Two gardens side by side, clearly tended by people who talked to each other, who shared tools and advice and time. It was visible in the way certain plants appeared in both spaces, in the matching trellises they had built together, in the worn path between the 2 yards. "You two have done wonderful work," Helen told them as the tour wound down. "It's nice to see neighbors really neighborly, especially after what you went through this winter." The story had become town legend by now. The carbon monoxide leak, Solace's warnings, the narrow escape. Neris had been asked to tell it multiple times, and each time she felt the weight of how close they had come to a very different ending. That evening, after the last visitor left, Neris and Kyle sat on her porch with glasses of iced tea, exhausted but satisfied. Solace sprawled between them, belly up, completely relaxed. The sky was turning that particular shade of blue that came just before sunset, and the air smelled like lilacs and fresh-cut grass. "I never thought I'd have days like this again," Cale said quietly. "Good days. Days where I'm tired from doing things I enjoyed." "They come back," Neris assured him. "Slowly and mixed in with bad days, but they come back." "How long did it take for you?" "Years. But I also wasn't doing the work you're doing." "I wasn't going to counseling or actively trying to heal. I just waited for time to pass, which is different from actually moving through grief." "Do you have regrets about that? About not getting help sooner?" Neris thought about this honestly. "Sometimes. I wonder what those years could have been like if I'd been braver about facing my pain. But I also know I did the best I could at the time. We all do." She glanced at him. "You're doing better than I did. I don't feel like it most days." "That's because you're in it. When you're swimming through deep water, you can't see how far you've come. You only see how much water is still ahead." She pointed at his garden. "But look at that. 3 months ago, you were in a hospital bed. Now you have tomatoes planted." He laughed, a genuine sound. "When you put it that way." As darkness fell, lightning bugs emerged, blinking codes to each other in the warm night. Solace watched them intently, tail twitching, but didn't try to catch them. He was content to observe, Neris thought, now that his urgent work was done. He had saved them, brought them together, and now he could simply be a cat again. "I'm glad you moved next door," Neris said suddenly. "I know that sounds strange, given everything that happened, but I am. I'm glad too." Cale reached over and scratched Solace behind the ears. "Even the terrible parts brought good things. That probably says something profound about life, but I'm too tired to figure out what." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one. Two people who had survived winter and were learning to trust spring. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments of grief and confusion. But tonight, on this porch, with this cat, in this gentle dusk, they were exactly where they needed to be. Living, not just surviving. Living. June brought heat that settled over Maple Hollow like a blanket. The gardens flourished, almost too much. Neris found herself cutting back roses and staking tomatoes that were growing faster than she expected. Cale's first garden exceeded all his predictions. His tomatoes were heavy with green fruit, his lettuce abundant, his beans climbing trellises with determination. "Beginner's luck," he joked, but Neris could see his pride. He took pictures of his garden, sent them to Maria's sister in Vermont. "Sarah says Maria would be proud," he reported. "She's invited me to visit this fall. Are you going to go?" "Maybe. It would be good to see Maria's family, to not feel so cut off from that part of my life." He paused. "I've been avoiding them because it hurts, but maybe that's exactly why I should go." His progress was visible in moments like these, in his willingness to face difficulty instead of running from it. The grief counseling was working. So was the friendship they had built, the routines they had established. Most evenings they ate dinner together, alternating between their houses. They had fallen into an easy partnership, splitting groceries and cooking duties, comfortable in each other's space. Mrs. Johnson commented on it one morning at the bakery. "You two are quite the pair. Half the town thinks you're dating." Nerys felt heat rise in her face. "We're just friends." "I know. I'm just telling you what people are saying." Mrs. Johnson smiled. "Not that it would be scandalous if you were dating. You're both adults." The conversation stayed with Nerys all day, making her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't quite name. She and Cale were friends, good friends, but was there more to it than that? She didn't think so. Walter had been her great love, and she had never imagined another. Cale was still deeply grieving Maria. Romance wasn't on the table for either of them, but companionship was. Partnership. The building of a shared life, even if that life was just neighboring gardens and evening meals. Was that enough? Or were they heading towards something more complicated? She was still thinking about it that evening when Cale knocked on her door, his face drawn with worry. "Something's wrong with Solace." Fear shot through her. "What do you mean?" "He was in my kitchen, and he started acting strange, just like he did before, staring at the wall. Won't come when I call." Nerys's heart hammered as she followed Cale to his house. She found Solace in the exact position Cale had described, standing rigid near the wall that faced the street, his ears back, body tense. It was exactly how he had acted before, when he had been trying to warn her about the carbon monoxide. "No," Nerys breathed. "Not again." They checked all the carbon monoxide detectors immediately. Every single one read 0 ppm, green light steady and reassuring. No danger. Everything safe. "Maybe it's not carbon monoxide," Cale said. "Maybe it's something else." "Like what?" "I don't know. A mouse in the walls? Another animal? Electrical issues?" They stood there uncertainly, watching Solace, who wouldn't move from his spot. Nerys's mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. Had the repairs missed something? Was there still poison in these walls? Or was Solace sick, his brain damaged from the previous exposure, causing him to imagine dangers that didn't exist? "We should call the fire department," Cale said. "And tell them what?" "My cat is acting strange. They'll think we're paranoid." Better paranoid than dead. He had a point. Nerys called Captain Morrison directly, explained the situation. To his credit, the captain didn't dismiss them. "I'll send someone over." "Probably nothing, but after what you all went through, better safe than sorry." 2 firefighters arrived within 20 minutes, carrying gas detectors and thermal imaging cameras. They checked everything. Carbon monoxide, natural gas, electrical systems. They examined walls with infrared sensors looking for hotspots. They sniffed for gas leaks and listened for hissing pipes. After an hour of thorough investigation, they found nothing wrong. "Your cat might just be hearing something we can't," one firefighter suggested. "Animals have better senses than we do. Could be a mouse, or pipes expanding, or even something outside that's bothering him." After they left, Nerys sat on Cale's floor beside Solace, who had finally relaxed once the firefighters started their inspection, as if satisfied that the humans were taking his concerns seriously. She stroked his head, and he purred, but his eyes remained watchful. "What if this is just who he is now?" she asked Cale. "Hypervigilant, traumatized. What if he's going to see danger everywhere because he learned that invisible things can kill? Then we help him through it, the same way we're helping each other." It was the right answer, but it didn't ease Nerys's worry. Over the next few days, Solace had 2 more episodes of strange behavior, both in Cale's house, both near walls. Each time, they checked the detectors. Each time, everything read safe. Each time, Nerys felt her anxiety ratchet higher. "Maybe he shouldn't come to my house anymore," Cale suggested reluctantly. "If it's triggering him." "No. He needs to feel safe in both our homes. We can't let fear control his life." Nerys paused. "Or ours." But the incidents made her realize how fragile their new peace was, how quickly fear could return, how the trauma of those winter months had left marks on all of them, visible and invisible. Solace's vigilance was just the most obvious manifestation. She called the veterinarian, scheduled a full workup. The exam found nothing physically wrong. "Cats can develop anxiety disorders just like humans," Dr. Martinez explained. "After what he went through, some behavioral changes would be expected. The question is whether this is temporary stress or a longer-term condition. How do we tell the difference? Time, patience, and maybe some environmental enrichment. Keep him stimulated, give him lots of positive experiences, help him rebuild trust that his world is safe. They tried everything. New toys, more playtime, extra attention. Slowly, Solace began to relax again. The episodes became less frequent, then stopped entirely. By the end of June, he seemed back to his normal self, though Neris noticed he still sometimes paused near walls, listening, before deciding everything was okay and moving on. "He's checking," Cale observed one evening. "Making sure." "That's not anxiety, that's wisdom." "You think?" "I do." He learned that danger can be invisible, that you have to pay attention to subtle signals. He's just being careful now. That's not trauma. That's smart. The reframe helped Neris see Solace's behavior differently. He wasn't damaged, he was experienced. He had learned to trust his instincts, to check what couldn't be seen, to take seriously what others might dismiss. In a way, they were all doing the same thing now, all more careful, more aware, more attentive to the possibility that things could go wrong in ways you didn't expect. One evening in early July, as they sat on Neris's porch watching fireflies, Cale said, "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Johnson said about people thinking we're dating." Neris felt her stomach tighten. "Oh? I want you to know I don't expect anything like that. I value our friendship too much to complicate it. I feel the same way." "Good." He paused. "But I also want you to know that you're important to me. Maybe the most important person in my life right now. I don't want to lose this because people are gossiping or we're both too scared to acknowledge that we need each other." "We do need each other," Neris agreed softly. "And that's okay. It doesn't have to be romantic to matter." "No, it doesn't." They sat in comfortable silence, and Solace jumped into Neris's lap, settled himself with a pleased sigh. The fireflies blinked their codes. The night breathed around them, and two people who had survived terrible things together continued the careful work of building lives worth surviving for. August arrived with the drowsy heat that made everything slow down. Gardens produced faster than anyone could harvest. Tomatoes split from their own abundance. Zucchini appeared overnight like magic tricks. Neris spent her mornings canning and freezing, preserving summer for the winter months ahead. Cale helped, learning how to blanch beans and process tomatoes, filling his freezer with vegetables he had grown himself. "Maria would laugh if she could see me doing this," he said, stirring a pot of tomato sauce. "She tried for years to get me interested in cooking. I always said I was too busy." "Do you think about her less now?" Neris asked carefully. It was the kind of question you had to be brave to ask, but they had reached a place where brave questions were possible. Not less. Differently. He turned down the heat. At first, every thought was sharp, like touching a fresh wound. Now the thoughts are softer. Sad, but not agonizing. I can remember good things without immediately spiraling into remembering that she's gone. That's healing. Is it? Sometimes it feels like forgetting. It's not forgetting. It's learning to hold both things at once. She was real and she's gone. Both are true. Both will always be true. Neris checked the canner. After Walter died, I was terrified that if I stopped hurting, it would mean he didn't matter. But that's not how it works. He mattered then. He matters now. The hurt fading doesn't change that. They worked side by side, filling jars with sauce, the kitchen steamy and fragrant. Solus supervised from his spot by the window, occasionally commenting with opinions no one could understand, but everyone appreciated. This was their routine now, their normal. Work and talk and the companionable silence of people who trusted each other. The Maple Hollow Summer Festival came at the end of August, 3 days of vendors and music and food that transformed the town square into a celebration. Neris hadn't attended in years, but Cale wanted to go, and she found herself agreeing. They walked downtown on Friday evening, joining streams of neighbors heading toward the music. The square was strung with lights, booths selling everything from handmade jewelry to kettle corn. A band played on the gazebo, classic rock covers that had people dancing on the grass. Children ran between their parents' legs, faces sticky with cotton candy. The air smelled like fried dough and summer and community. "This is nice," Cale said, and Neris heard the surprise in his voice. He had been so isolated for so long that simple pleasures felt revelatory. They walked through the festival, stopping at booths, running into neighbors. Everyone wanted to talk to them, to ask about Solace, to rehash the story of their narrow escape. Neris had grown tired of telling it, but she understood that it had become part of the town's mythology. Stories like that bound communities together, reminded everyone that danger could hide in plain sight, and that paying attention to warnings could save lives. At the pie booth, they found Helen Crawford selling slices to raise money for the library. "Neris, just the person I wanted to see. We're looking for volunteers for the fall reading program. Would you consider coming back? Just an hour or two a week?" Neris hesitated. She had left that world behind when she retired, convinced her time of being useful had passed. But standing there with festival music playing and Cale watching her with encouraging eyes, she realized she missed it. Missed the children, missed the stories, missed the particular satisfaction of connecting readers with books. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." Helen beamed. "Wonderful. I'll call you next week with details." As they walked away, Cale said, "That made you happy. I could see it on your face." "It did. I didn't realize how much I missed having purpose beyond my own small life." "Your life isn't small. You know what I mean. Something beyond myself." They bought Italian ice and sat on a bench near the gazebo, watching people dance. A couple in their 80s twirled past, moving with the ease of people who had been dancing together for decades. Another couple, teenagers, stumbled through steps they clearly didn't know, laughing at their own mistakes. Life in all its stages happening simultaneously. "Do you ever think about the future?" Cale asked suddenly. "Really think about it? What comes next?" "Sometimes. More lately than I used to." Neris licked melting ice from her spoon. "For a long time after Walter died, I couldn't see past the next day. Now I can see weeks ahead, months even. That's progress." "What do you see?" "Fall. The leaves changing. Thanksgiving with Emily's family over video call. The library program. My garden going to sleep for winter." She paused. "You, probably, if you're staying." "I'm staying." He said it with certainty. "Boston doesn't feel like home anymore. This place does, or it's starting to. Even after everything that happened. Because of everything that happened. This is where I almost died but didn't. Where I met you and Solace. Where I learned I could survive grief." He watched the dancers. "Maria and I used to talk about retiring to a small town someday, taking it slow. Growing old together." His voice caught, but he continued. "I can't grow old with her, but I can still grow old somewhere she would have loved. Maybe that's enough." Neris reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, and they sat like that for a moment, hands clasped, watching the festival continue around them. Then the song changed to something faster, and Cale stood up, offering his hand. "Dance with me. I haven't danced in 12 years. Then you're overdue." She let him pull her to her feet, and they joined the crowd near the gazebo. Neither of them were good dancers, but it didn't matter. They moved awkwardly, laughing when they stepped on each other's feet, letting the music and the moment carry them. Other dancers smiled at them, and Neris realized they looked like exactly what they were. Two people learning to live again, stumbling through steps they had forgotten, finding joy in the trying. When the song ended, they were both breathing hard, laughing. "That was terrible," Neris gasped. "The worst," Cale agreed, grinning. "Want to do it again?" They danced 3 more songs before finally admitting defeat and returning to their bench. As darkness fell, the light strung through the square began to glow brighter, and the festival took on a magical quality. Vendors started packing up, but the music continued, and people lingered, not quite ready to let the evening end. "Thank you," Cale said quietly. "For what?" "For this. For pushing me to come. For dancing even though we're both terrible at it. For showing me that life can still have moments like this. You're welcome. But you did the same for me. I would have stayed home if you hadn't wanted to come." They walked home slowly, taking the long way through residential streets where children were catching fireflies in jars and adults were sitting on porches with glasses of wine. The whole town felt alive, connected, part of something larger than individual lives. At Neris's house, Solace was waiting on the porch, as if he had known exactly when they would return. He meowed his greeting and twined between their legs, demanding attention. "He was worried," Neris said, scooping him up. "Smart cat, making sure we came home safe." Cale said goodnight and headed to his own house, and Neris carried Solace inside. She fed him his evening meal and got ready for bed, but sleep felt far away. She was still buzzing with the energy of the festival, with music and laughter, and the strange, wonderful feeling of being part of the world again, instead of just observing it. Lying in bed, Solace purring beside her, she thought about the past year. How close she had come to a very different ending. How easily she could have ignored Solace's warnings just one more day, fallen asleep in that poisoned house, and never woken up. But she hadn't. She had listened, had trusted, had survived. And now she was here, in this moment, having danced badly at a summer festival, having agreed to return to work she loved, having built a friendship that sustained her. Life wasn't perfect. Grief still lived in her heart, and probably always would. But grief had made room for other things. Joy, hope, connection, purpose. That was enough, more than enough, that was everything. Outside, the night settled over Maple Hollow, and all across town, people slept in houses filled with clean air, smoke detectors on walls, safety measures in place. They slept trusting that morning would come, that life would continue, that the invisible dangers had been addressed. Most of them would never know how fragile that safety was, how easily it could slip away. But Nerys knew, and knowing made her grateful in ways she couldn't fully express. Grateful for breath, for consciousness, for the simple miracle of waking up to another day. Grateful for a cat who refused to give up on her. Grateful for a neighbor who became a friend. Grateful for the gift of normal, which was the most extraordinary gift of all. September arrived with crisp mornings and warm afternoons, the kind of weather that made everyone in Maple Hollow sigh with relief after August's humidity. The maple trees began their slow transformation, green giving way to hints of gold and orange. Nerys started her volunteer work at the library, reading to children every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. She had forgotten how much energy small children had, how many questions they could ask, how they looked at books like treasure chests waiting to be opened. "You're wonderful with them," the current head librarian, a woman named Patricia who had been a college student when Nerys worked there, told her after the first week. "The kids already ask when Mrs. Campbell is coming back." The words warmed Nerys in ways she hadn't expected. Being needed, being useful, having something to offer beyond her own immediate circle, these things mattered more than she had realized during her years of retreat. She found herself planning which books to read, thinking about the children between sessions, remembering their names and preferences. Purpose had returned to her life, and with it, energy she thought she had lost to age. Cale was experiencing his own renewal. His grief counselor had helped him reach a point where he could talk about Maria without breaking, could remember their life together without feeling destroyed by her absence. He was sleeping better, eating better, engaging with the world more fully. He had even started sketching again, architectural drawings at first, then branching into other subjects. Nerys found drawings of the garden, of Solace, of the view from his kitchen window. They were beautiful, detailed, full of a sensibility that understood how light and shadow created meaning. "You should do something with these," Nerys told him one evening, flipping through his sketchbook. "Like what?" "Display them, sell them, share them with the world. They're too good to keep hidden in a notebook." He looked uncomfortable with the praise, but also pleased. "Maria used to say the same thing. She thought I wasted my talent on buildings when I could have been creating art." Maybe she was right, or maybe both things are true. You created beautiful buildings and now you can create beautiful art. Different seasons of life allow for different expressions. The idea seemed to take root in him. Over the following weeks, he became more serious about his sketching, working on technique, experimenting with different subjects. He drew the town square, the old church, the view down Maple Lane with its namesake trees. Each drawing was careful and considered, showing the same attention to detail that had made him a successful architect. In early October, Nerys suggested he enter some pieces in the Maple Hollow Fall Art Show, a community event held at the town hall. It's not a professional gallery or anything, just local artists showing their work. But it would be a start. I don't know. People will judge them. That's the point. Art is meant to be seen, judged, responded to. You can't keep it safe forever. The parallel to his own journey wasn't lost on Cale. He submitted 3 drawings, one of the garden, one of Main Street in autumn, and one of Solace sitting in a window, backlit by morning sun. When Nerys saw them hung in the town hall, professionally matted and framed, she felt a surge of pride. They were good, really good. They captured Maple Hollow with affection and attention, showing the beauty in ordinary things. The art show opening was a Friday evening, and what seemed like the entire town showed up. People moved through the displays, wine glasses in hand, commenting on paintings and photographs and sculptures. When they reached Cale's drawings, they stopped, really looking, and Neris heard the murmurs of appreciation. "These are remarkable," Helen Crawford said, studying the drawing of Main Street. "Who's the artist?" "Cale Brennan," Patricia the librarian answered. "He's new in town. Lives on Maple Lane. Well, he's very talented." By the end of the night, all 3 drawings had red dots beside them indicating sales. Cale looked stunned. "People paid money for my drawings. They paid money for art," Neris corrected, "because that's what these are, art." The validation seemed to unlock something in Cale. He had been existing in a kind of limbo, retired but directionless, surviving but not quite living. Now he had found something that gave shape to his days, something that connected him to the community, something that was his alone, separate from his identity as Maria's widower or as the neighbor who nearly died from carbon monoxide. As October deepened, Maple Hollow became impossibly beautiful. The maples lived up to the town's name, turning brilliant shades of red and gold. Tourists drove through taking photographs. Residents walked slowly, savoring the display. Every gust of wind brought leaves spiraling down, and children jumped in the piles their parents raked. Neris and Cale took walks through the town most evenings, Solace sometimes following them like a dog, sometimes waiting at home. They had become a familiar sight, and neighbors no longer asked if they were dating. They had moved beyond labels into simply being part of the landscape, 2 people whose lives had become entwined in ways that defied simple explanation. "Have you thought about Thanksgiving?" Neris asked one evening as they walked past the town square, where preparations were underway for the holiday parade. "Emily wants me to come to California, but I was thinking of staying here." "Why?" "Because this is home, and because I thought maybe we could cook together, make it our own tradition." Cale stopped walking, turning to face her. "Are you sure? I don't want you to miss time with your family because of me." "I'm not. I'm choosing to spend it with family. You are family now, Cale. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but in the way that matters. You're the person I want to share my life with, my days with, my holidays with, if that's okay with you." He smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way it rarely did. "It's more than okay. It's exactly what I want too." They continued walking, and the conversation turned to menu planning, to what they would cook and who they would invite. Maybe the Johnsons. Maybe Helen Crawford, who was recently widowed and would appreciate the company. Maybe Patricia, who had mentioned she would be alone this year with her kids visiting their father. The holiday was taking shape, something they were creating together rather than enduring separately. On Halloween, Neris and Cale sat on her porch, handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. Solace watched from the window, fascinated by the parade of small ghosts and superheroes. The children knew about Solace by now, knew the story of the hero cat, and many asked if they could see him. Neris brought him to the door for brief appearances, and he tolerated the attention with patient dignity. "He's famous," one little girl dressed as a princess declared. "My mum says he's the smartest cat in the world." "He might be," Neris agreed, scratching his ears. After the last trick-or-treaters left, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, the bowl of leftover candy between them. The night was cool but not cold, and stars were visible despite the glow of porch lights up and down the street. "A year ago I was in Boston, alone in my house, not answering the door for trick-or-treaters," Cale said. "Now I'm here, with you, part of a community. It's hard to believe how much has changed. A year ago I was probably in bed by now, pretending Halloween wasn't happening," Neris said. "We've both come a long way, because of him." Cale gestured to Solace, who had settled between them, eyes half closed. "He saved us both." "He did, but we also saved ourselves by listening, by trusting, by doing the hard work of healing." They sat in companionable silence, watching the last of the trick-or-treaters head home, parents with flashlights guiding children loaded with candy, life continuing in its normal, beautiful, miraculous way. The invisible dangers had been addressed. The alarms were working. The air was clean. They were safe, but more than safe. They were alive, really alive, and that made all the difference. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and bright. The kind of November day that promised winter's arrival wasn't far behind. Neris woke early and found Solace already awake, sitting on her windowsill watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. She joined him there, both of them quiet, both of them present in the moment. "Big day," she told him. "First Thanksgiving with company in 12 years. He meowed his approval and rubbed his head against her hand. His collar, the one Cale had given him, caught the morning light. Hero of Maple Lane. The label still fit. By 9 o'clock, Nerys and Cale were both in her kitchen, which was larger and better equipped for serious cooking. The turkey was in the oven, filling the house with its rich aroma. They worked side by side, chopping vegetables for stuffing, making cranberry sauce from scratch, preparing dishes that had been holiday staples in both their previous lives. Maria always made sweet potato casserole with marshmallows on top, Cale said, peeling potatoes. "I know it's not sophisticated, but it was tradition. Then we're making it." Walter always insisted on his mother's cornbread stuffing recipe, even though I thought it was too dry. But it wouldn't have been Thanksgiving without it. They were building something new from pieces of their pasts, honoring the people they had loved while creating traditions that belonged to this new version of their lives. It felt right, weaving together history and present into something that could sustain them going forward. The guests arrived at 2 o'clock. Tom and Mrs. Johnson brought wine and rolls. Helen Crawford brought a pumpkin pie she had baked that morning. Patricia the librarian brought her famous green bean casserole and stories about the children in the reading program. They gathered in Nerys's dining room, which hadn't seen this much activity in over a decade. Before they ate, Tom suggested they go around the table and share what they were grateful for. It was a tradition Nerys remembered from childhood, one that had fallen away in her years of isolation. Now, sitting at a table full of people, she felt ready to participate again. Miss Johnson went first. "I'm grateful for neighbors who look out for each other and for second chances." Tom added, "For modern safety equipment and smart cats." Helen said, "For new friends and community that doesn't let you stay isolated even when you want to." Patricia smiled at Nerys, "For volunteers who remind children that reading is magical." When it was Cale's turn, he looked around the table, his eyes landing on each person before settling on Nerys. "I'm grateful for this town, this table, and the people who welcomed me when I was lost. I'm grateful to be alive, and I'm grateful for Solace, who made sure we all could be here today." Everyone looked at the cat, who was sitting in the corner of the dining room, supervising the proceedings with dignified interest. He seemed to understand he was being honored and stood, stretched, and walked to Cale, rubbing against his legs before settling at his feet. When it was Nerys's turn, she felt emotion rising in her throat. "I'm grateful for all of you, for this meal, this moment, this life I get to keep living. A year ago I was going through the motions, existing but not really present. Now I feel awake again, alive again, and that's because of the people at this table and one very persistent cat who refused to let me ignore danger." She paused. "I'm also grateful for Walter and Maria, who aren't here but made us who we are. They're part of this table too, in memory and love." Several people wiped their eyes. Cale reached over and squeezed her hand. The meal was wonderful, maybe because the food was good, or maybe because the company made everything taste better. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore, then sat around the table telling stories, laughing, connecting. This was what holidays were supposed to be, Nerys thought. Not perfect, not without sadness, but full of presence and meaning. As evening approached and guests prepared to leave, Helen pulled Nerys aside. "You've done something special here, brought people together, created community where there was isolation. I didn't do it alone." "No, but you did it, you and Cale both. You took something terrible and transformed it into connection." Helen smiled. "That's not easy to do. Most people just stay bitter." After everyone left, Nerys and Cale tackled the dishes together, another comfortable routine. Solus had relocated to the couch, full of turkey scraps they had slipped him and exhausted from all the attention. "That was perfect," Cale said, drying a serving platter. "Thank you for suggesting it." "It was perfect," Nerys agreed. "We should do it again next year." "Next year," Cale repeated, and the phrase hung in the air. A promise, a plan, a future they could both see and look forward to. That night, after Cale went home and Nerys prepared for bed, she stood at her window looking at the two houses side by side. A year ago, one had been slowly filling with poison. Now both stood clean and safe, lights glowing warmly, homes in the truest sense. The shared wall that had allowed carbon monoxide to seep through was now just a wall, neutral, no longer a source of danger. But the connection between the houses remained, deeper now than any physical structure. 2 lives saved. 2 people healing. 1 cat who had made all the difference. Solace appeared beside her, jumping onto the windowsill. Together they looked out at the quiet neighborhood, at Cale's house where a single light burned in his kitchen. He was probably sketching, Neris thought, or reading, or just sitting quietly, being present in his own life. "We did good," she told Solace. "All of us." He purred his agreement and settled down for the night, secure in the knowledge that his humans were safe. His vigilance had paid off, and the invisible dangers had been defeated. For now, at least. He would keep watching, just in case. That was his job. But for tonight, he could rest. Winter returned to Maple Hollow, but this time it felt different to Neris. Instead of a burden to endure, it was simply a season, one that would pass and give way to spring. She had plans that extended beyond the next few days, projects that would take months to complete, reasons to look forward instead of back. The library reading program was expanding, and Patricia wanted Neris to help plan a summer reading camp. "You're so good with the kids and they trust you. Would you consider being more involved?" Neris agreed immediately. Having purpose, being needed, these things had become essential to her sense of self. She was no longer just existing in the aftermath of loss. She was building a life that honored her past while embracing her present. Cale's art was gaining attention beyond Maple Hollow. A gallery in the county seat had seen his drawings at the fall show and invited him to display more work. He was both terrified and excited, spending hours sketching and refining pieces. The grief that had consumed him was still present, but had transformed into something generative, something that fueled creation rather than destruction. "Maria would love this," he told Neris one evening as they sat in his studio, which had once been a guest bedroom but was now filled with easels and art supplies. "She always believed I had this in me. I wish she could see it." "Maybe she can," Neris said gently. "Maybe this is part of her legacy, the belief she had in you finally bearing fruit." The idea seemed to comfort him. He continued working, and Neris continued reading in the corner. Solace sprawled across her lap. This was their routine now, spending evenings together but doing separate things, comfortable in shared space without needing constant interaction. It was the kind of companionship that came from deep trust, from knowing someone well enough that silence wasn't empty. As December progressed, Neris made a decision. This year she would decorate for Christmas, not because she had to, not out of obligation to tradition, but because she wanted to, because she had rediscovered joy in small rituals, in the transformation of ordinary space into something special. She brought the boxes up from the basement, and this time the weight didn't overwhelm her. Cale helped, and together they sorted through ornaments, each one carrying a story. Walter's childhood decoration from the 1950s, a silver bell that still chimed, ornaments the children had made in elementary school, a star Maria had given them one year, which Cale held with trembling hands before carefully hanging on the tree. They decorated both houses, inside and out, stringing lights and hanging wreaths. The houses that had stood dark the previous year now glowed with warmth and welcome. Neighbors noticed and commented, pleased to see 47 and 49 Maple Lane joining the festive spirit. On Christmas Eve, they attended the candlelight service at the old church downtown. Neris hadn't been to church in years, but something about the season, about how far they had all come, made her want to mark it with ritual. They sat in a pew near the back, Solace left at home, but very much in their thoughts, and held candles that flickered in the darkened sanctuary. The minister spoke about light in darkness, about hope in despair, about the miracle of survival. Neris felt the words settle into her bones. This was their story, finding light after terrible darkness, discovering hope when despair had seemed inevitable, surviving when death had come so close they could feel its breath. After the service, they walked home through streets lined with luminarias, the same tradition that had happened the year before when Neris had been too sick to participate. Now she walked beside Cale, breath-making clouds in the cold air, mind clear and body strong. She was alive. They were both alive, and that simple fact felt miraculous. At home, they exchanged simple gifts. Neris gave Cale a set of professional drawing pencils. He gave her a leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover. "For the mystery novel you're going to write," he said, Who says I'm writing one? I do. You've got stories in you. Time to let them out. They sat by her Christmas tree drinking cocoa, watching Solace play with a new catnip toy. The scene was peaceful, domestic, exactly what both of them had thought they would never have again. Contentment. Not wild happiness, not the intense joy of youth, but the deeper satisfaction of having faced darkness and chosen light, of having every reason to give up, but continuing anyway. I need to tell you something, Cale said, setting down his mug. I've been thinking about what comes next. Long term. Nerys felt a flutter of anxiety. Was he leaving? Moving back to Boston? She had grown so dependent on his presence, his friendship, the life they had built together. The gallery wants me to do more shows, he continued, which means I need to produce more work, really commit to this. And I can't do that while holding on to the idea that this is temporary, that I might leave Maple Hollow someday. So I've decided, this is home, permanently. I'm staying. Relief washed through Nerys. I'm so glad. I wanted you to know because you're a big part of that decision. Having you next door, our friendship, the life we've built, it matters to me, more than I can easily express. He paused. I know we're not romantic partners, and that's not what I'm suggesting. But we are partners in the way that counts. We look out for each other. We build life together. And I can't imagine doing this without you. I feel the same way. Nerys reached over and took his hand. Your family, Cale. Maybe the most important family I have right now. And I'm not going anywhere either. We're in this together. They sat like that, hands clasped, while the Christmas tree lights twinkled and Solace purred, and outside, snow began to fall again. Two people who had survived impossible odds, two people who had chosen to keep living when giving up, would have been easier. Two people connected by trauma, yes, but more importantly connected by resilience, by hope, by the daily decision to show up for life even when life felt overwhelming. Solace suddenly jumped onto the arm of Nerys's chair and meowed, looking directly at her face. She recognized that expression, the one that meant he wanted her attention for something important. What is it, friend? He jumped down and walked to the kitchen, looking back to make sure she was following. Both Nerys and Cale followed him, curious. Solace walked directly to the carbon monoxide detector, sat beneath it, and looked up at it, then at them. Nerys's heart jumped, but the detector showed green. 0 ppm. Everything safe. Solace meowed again, and this time Nerys understood. He wasn't warning them of danger, he was checking, making sure they were paying attention, making sure they remembered what he had taught them, that invisible things could kill, that you had to stay vigilant, that safety required constant attention. It's okay, she told him, kneeling down. We're watching, we're being careful. We learned. He headbutted her hand, satisfied, then walked back to the living room to resume playing with his toy. His job was done. The humans understood. They would check the detector, test it regularly, stay alert to danger. He could relax now, be a cat, trust that the lessons he had fought so hard to teach had finally taken root. He's remarkable, Cale said, watching Solace with something like awe. He is. He saved our lives. But more than that, he taught us how to save ourselves, how to pay attention, how to trust instincts, how to take warnings seriously even when we can't see the danger. Nerys stood, looking at the detector. I'll never ignore him again. Any strange behavior, any concern, I'll take it seriously immediately. Same. He earned that trust. They returned to the living room, to the comfort of the Christmas tree and the warmth of shared space. As midnight approached and Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, Nerys felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of acceptance. Walter was gone, and she missed him still. Maria was gone, and Cale would always grieve her. Those truths would never change, but they were here, alive, together, building something new from the fragments of their separate losses. And they had Solace, who watched over them with golden eyes that saw more than humans could, who loved them enough to fight for their survival, who reminded them daily that life was precious and fragile and worth protecting. As she prepared for bed that night, Nerys stopped at her bedroom window and looked out at the snow-covered street. Cale's house was dark except for a single light in his bedroom. All up and down Maple Lane, houses glowed with Christmas lights, families sleeping safely inside, carbon monoxide detectors on walls doing their silent work. Most people would never know how close this street had come to tragedy. Most would never understand how a faulty furnace, and a few degrees of temperature could turn homes into death traps. But Nerys knew, Kale knew, and they would never forget. Solus jumped onto the bed and settled on Walter's pillow, his usual spot now. He looked at Nerys with those wise, patient eyes, and she could have sworn she saw satisfaction there. His humans were safe. The danger had passed. He had done his job, and done it well. "Thank you," she whispered to him, "not for the first time and not for the last. Thank you for not giving up on me. On us." He purred loud and steady, a sound like contentment, like love, like the promise that he would always watch, always warn, always protect. Because that was what love did. It paid attention. It refused to ignore danger. It fought for survival, even when survival seemed impossible. And sometimes, when you were very lucky, love wore a fur coat and had 4 paws and golden eyes that saw what humans couldn't see. Love had a voice that cried out warnings in the darkness. Love had persistence that outlasted ignorance and confusion and the fog of invisible poison. Love saved lives, not with grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but with daily vigilance, with constant care, with the refusal to give up on the ones who mattered. Nerys climbed into bed and turned off the light. In the darkness, Solus's purr continued, a steady rhythm that spoke of safety and presence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new ordinary moments that made up a life. But tonight, they could rest. The detectors glowed green. The air was clean. The danger had passed. And on Maple Lane, in 2 houses that stood side by side, 3 souls who had survived winter's darkness settled into the peace of knowing they would see spring together. Because sometimes the greatest gift isn't avoiding danger altogether. It's having someone who loves you enough to warn you when danger comes. Someone who refuses to let you ignore what you can't see. Someone who reminds you day after day that your life matters, that survival is worth fighting for, that love doesn't give up. And sometimes that someone has 4 paws and a heart bigger than anyone could imagine. Sometimes the hero isn't the one who defeats danger with strength, but the one who defeats it with persistence, patience, and the simple refusal to stop caring. Love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it meows, but it never, ever stops protecting the ones it holds dear.